Hello, good morning, everyone. This is a new session of PensamENTs. As you know, this is the monthly or sometimes bi-monthly webinar that we organize from ENT of topics of our common interest. And today we have the pleasure to count with Salvador Pueyo. Salvador Pueyo has been a friend for long. He holds a PhD in biology. He's a pluri and transdisciplinary researcher who has worked in several institutions in the Brazilian Amazonia, in Canada, and he also was leading the group on on climate complexity at the Catalan Institute of Climate Sciences. And at present, he collaborates with the Autonomous University of Barcelona and with the University of Barcelona. Salvador, it's a pleasure to have you here today. He will discuss about growth and pandemics. And as usual, we will have a session of around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have some more time for comments, questions, and discussion. Thanks, Salvador. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Ignacy. Many thanks, Dan. Many thanks to all of those who are watching. Let me share the presentation. Well, the message of this talk is quite clear. It's that economic growth causes pandemics. It will be organized in 4 parts. First, I will review how different economic activities and the structure have an incidence on the change of pandemics, either positive or negative. Then I will give an interpretation of how these different activities interact among themselves and with the general dynamics of the economic system. I will also introduce some distributive issues, who wins and who loses, and I will end up trying to outline some solutions, which is what really makes that speaking about this make sense. So they are drivers. When in March 2020, many people reacted like this because they did not expect something like COVID-19. No, it was not within their imaginaries. But on the other hand, for many people who knew something about epidemiology, this was not such a surprise, because in fact there was a lot of evidence to that pointed that something like this would probably happen the sooner or the later, and that it can happen again, and perhaps even be worse. But in spite of this evidence, this was something that was not widely disseminated. This is why most people were not aware of it. And also governments did nothing really to prevent it. So de facto, governments were acting as denialists until really they found a crisis a major crisis in their hands that they had to manage. And well, why many of us expected the sooner or the later something like this? Well, basically because every year there are new pathogens emerging anywhere in the world. I mean, fortunately, the vast majority of these pathogens are not by far as successful as the COVID-19 virus, but this is a lottery. And the sooner or the later, there had to be some pathogen that would be indeed successful. And as I said, if we don't change, if we don't change the path that we are following, there will be more, and they could be worse. So, well, and why are there so many new pathogens emerging? A key reason is that in natural ecosystems, in fact, there are thousands of pathogens that could potentially infect humans. But normally, if these ecosystems are not disturbed, these pathogens pose absolutely no problem. I mean, it is when there are economic activities that are causing deforestation, ecosystem fragmentation, degradation. It's also with livestock trade, with climate change, which is increasingly impacting on ecosystems. All of this is messing ecosystems, is making animals have interactions that they would have normally not had, is creating new paths for pathogens to move, and many of these pathogens, or some of these pathogens, eventually reach humans. No? So we have key factor, no, which is all of this set of economic activities that have a direct impact on ecosystems. Notably, animal agriculture is a prime one, and also the set of activities that involve greenhouse gas emissions. No, so a lot of economic activities, directly or indirectly, has this kind of impact. I mentioned animal agriculture, but it also has a much more direct role. So I will put here again more explicitly. It has a much more direct role for two reasons, basically. One, because many of these pathogens use livestock as a stepping stone before reaching humans. And second, because in fact, there are many pathogens that are originating directly in livestock. And basically, this is favored by the fact that we have an industrial form of farming, no? Which is essential to have such an amount of animal agriculture, no? But this involves industrial animal farming with high densities of animals, with high precariousness, and this is highly conducive to the emergence of virulent pathogens and to their spread. No? And in fact, one of the main specific concerns right now is the possible emergence of some new strain of flu that can be much more deadly than the current one, no? And it could be from industrial farms. Then, potentially in the future, another source of new pathogens can be the responsible use of genetic engineering, but this is quite a special topic that I will leave aside. But anyway, whichever the origin of new pathogens, including also genetic engineering, they find special good conditions where there are high urban concentrations because of the high density of people, and especially where there are precarious conditions of living, no? As it happens for some sectors of people living in cities. And very importantly, currently there is a huge global hypermobility, especially because of airlines. No, I mean, airlines are really the main way in which different parts of the world are connected super quickly. And in fact, mathematical models of the spread of infectious disease often take into account only airlines and not other means of transportation because they are so important. No? So, and well, as an example of this, as you probably know, in 2003, there was another coronavirus emerging from China and spreading to other countries. And the countries to which it spread were countries that had a high air connectivity, were a handful of countries with especially high air connectivity. And for example, in the case of Spain, it had an intermediate connectivity and there was only one case. And everywhere, finally, it was controlled on time before having something like COVID-19. After this, international flights have been duplicating every 10 years until the current pandemic, no? Until before the current pandemic. In Spain, they have increased even more. So well, of course, now SARS would have infected many more than one person, people in the specific case of Spain, and worldwide it would have been much more difficult to control on time, no? And this is clearly one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons why the case of COVID-19 has been so different. So this is really something important to take into account, no? Well, the point is that we have all of these economic activities and structures that are well known to favor infectious disease. On the other hand, it is also true that we have unprecedented means to fight disease that has benefited humanity unequally, but that have had an impact. And both kinds of activities that favor disease are different phases of, have emerged historically in a process of economic growth. So I would like to go one step further and to discuss how these different pieces with contradictory impacts fit together and fit with the general economic system. So I will propose what I call an epidemiological Jevons paradox. As many of you know, the concept of Jevons paradox refers to a notion that was introduced by the economist Stanley Jevons in England in the 19th century, referring specifically to coal, but later it has been generalized by many authors. There are many authors who have worked on this topic, not thinking especially about coal, but in general about energy and many other resources. And well, and had a special role in this. So there are people who know much more about this than myself here, including Ignazi. But the basic idea is that when there are improvements in the efficiency of use of energy, for example, the use of energy to produce ungiven goods or services, often there is an increase in the consumption of these goods and services, which so that the potential benefit of this increase of efficiency to reduce energy consumption can be offset partly or completely, or can even be overcompensated by this increase of consumption. And well, this is well known about ecological economists, no? And my interpretation is that in the case of infectious diseases, there is something very similar going on, no? Because, as I will justify now, infectious diseases pose an obstacle to the growth of all of these sectors and structures that favor the same infectious diseases. No? So there is a feedback between this, a negative feedback between these economic sectors and infectious diseases. And as far as we have health systems able to suppress these diseases, this gives the potential for these sectors to grow and thus to increase the risk of new infectious diseases. No? And well, of course, the fact that there is a potential doesn't mean that this potential has to be realized. But here it's where it's very important, the economic system where we are embedded, no? That indeed generates a lot of incentives to take advantage of opportunities to grow, and even generates what is called growth imperatives, which means that, for example, a firm that doesn't take advantage of an opportunity to grow may well be outcompeted by other firms that do take advantage of this opportunity. So at the end, even if people is unwilling to cause a problem like this, finally the dynamics of the systems carries naturally to this happening, no? And these sectors growing and the risk being created, the risk and a risk that eventually materializes, no? Sooner or later. So why do I say that all of these sectors have this feedback with infections? Well, in the case of activities that have a direct impact on ecosystems, perhaps it's where it is the least obvious. But in fact, for example, if Europeans, it is widely accepted that if Europeans were not able to colonize African rainforest in other centuries, it was because they found diseases there that stopped their advance. No? And also, for example, the first attempt to build the Panama Canal did not work because workers were dying massively because of infections such as yellow fever, for example. And even nowadays, this feedback has been explicitly described in the case of Amazon deforestation, no? Between deforestation and malaria, both senses. In fact, nowadays, the main cause of deforestation in Brazilian Amazonia is cattle. But this cattle, something which is in fact an element coming from elsewhere, no? Needs to be heavily medicalized to sustain, no? this cattle rising. And all of this without the aid of medicine, and in this case veterinary, would not have been possible. So to some extent, this feedback exists even in this case. In the case of livestock is even much clearer. The first thing I would like to point out about livestock is that animal-based food consumption has increased massively in wealthy countries during the last century. And also other countries, when their GDP grows, most of them are following the same paths that has been previously followed by Western wealthy countries. No? So there is in general a clear relation between GDP and the consumption of animal-based products. Well, as you see, there is some cultural resistance in the case of India, but the general path is this. No? And this massive increase that there has been in animal-based products has only been possible with the development of this intensive, industrial animal farming, that on its turn, it's only possible with a massive use of antibiotics, antivirals, and all of these kind of remedies to counteract this high density and high precariousness that occurs in industrial farms, no? And so this creates these conditions that are so good for the emergence of new diseases. And specifically in the case of antibiotics, as you know, is creating a specific problem, which is the emergence of new strains of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, and is perhaps the main threat for the continuing effectivity of health systems in the future. So it's something really quite sober. In the case of cities, historically, there was a much higher death rate in cities than in rural areas mainly because of the prevalence of infectious diseases there, because of high densities and so on. And in fact, even mortality exceeded natality in cities. So really there were contracting forces. On the one hand, cities are known as engines of growth, no? So there are many activities favored by the urban environment that attract workers, and people can be attracted also for other reasons. But on the other hand, there was this increased mortality and morbidity that was a kind of counteracting force, no? But this kind of balance, let's say, a moving balance, changed with the advance of health systems. So cities, and as an engine of growth, could grow without such a limit, no? Even though now, when there is some new disease such as COVID-19, it's cities the first place where it is easy for it to spread, no? Before health system has time to react. On the other hand, there are also some advantage for health systems here, so things are more tricky. But the feedback, in principle, clearly exists unless there is this presence of the health systems, no? In the case of flights, the feedback with infections has been absolutely impressing during this pandemic. In part, this was because of government regulations, but not only, also because of the spontaneous reaction of people. I mean, when infections become more something more regular and not a new event like this, there can be a tendency to accommodation, and this is occurring, but this doesn't mean that the feedback should disappear completely, no? I also mentioned climate change. In this case, there are lots of economic activities involved. In fact, there is quite a close, thus far there has been quite a close connection between GDP growth in general and greenhouse gas emissions. And as we have seen during the pandemic, also infectious diseases are an obstacle for economic growth in general, no? So to some extent, the feedback is also here. So we see in general that just putting together things that are well known, no, I'm giving no new data, and just putting together things that are well known in the literature, we see that these mechanisms of the economic system that create this growth imperative are also making that the potential benefit that we could obtain for health systems are not fully obtained, and in fact this benefit in part is transmuted into growth and profit in a lot of sectors, no? And I think that this is something that would be good to be, if it were widely known. Further known, for more, these conditions that have created this increased risk of new pandemics and that have been pressing health system to grow, in fact, to be reinforced more quickly to cope with this new risk, no, in this case of positive feedback, has also found a new obstacle, which is during the last few decades, which is that neoliberal policies, and especially as they are materialized in the form of budgetary cuts, has been an obstacle for health system, for public and communitary health systems to keep in this race, no? So which have made things even better for infectious. But well, and until now I have been just talking of the economic system in general, talking about sectors, but not about how different people can receive cost or benefits of all of this machinery to different extents. And I think that this is also a super important issue. It would be important that all of us be aware of it, because because all of us are paying cost that for activities that benefit other people, no? In fact, in all of these activities that I mentioned, there are differences between those who pay the cost and those who benefit. But I put here the example of flights because I think that here the difference is especially extreme. If we examine who benefits, especially from flights, of course we have shareholders of airlines. Then there are people who flies. I mean, most of us have flights and time, even international or long distance trips, which are the ones especially problematic in this context. I have flights and time, which when I thought that it was especially justified for some reason. But there is an incredible inequality in the amounts of flights taken by different people, no? So really there is a small minority that is responsible for most of the flights, like for example, top managers and so on. So really the benefits, both as consumers and or profiting as shareholder, is strongly concentrated in a minority. On the other hand, all the costs are not concentrated in a minority. The costs are absolutely widespread and also with high inequality, but not especially concentrated the cost on those who reap the benefits, no? Who reap the benefits. These costs include monetized costs, which to some extent are paid by those who benefit from airlines. But then there are environmental costs and epidemiological costs that are, as I said, much more widespread and in fact unequally distributed, but in a way that is unfair, no? And this cost has material. I mean, these costs take the epidemiological costs take the form of a risk that accumulates through time and that at some point materializes. And in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has clearly materialized in form of ill people, in the form of deaths, in the form of a lot of care work that was unpaid or that was underpaid, in the form of restrictions that all of us are suffering, in the form of repression that has especially fallen on people who had the least responsibility on what was happening. And I find impressive that we have not been able to take much more awareness of this, no? That really is such an injustice that is affecting most of us. And so that I think this is give really a base for mobilization that is not happening. And well, as I said, in the other sectors, you can also make the same case, even though in the case of flights is even more extreme. And so, well, what are the solutions for this? Just briefly, I will try to outline some ideas. As I said, one of the problems are budgetary cuts and neoliberal reforms. So here is part of the solution. But as I also said, the epidemiological paradox is something deeper that has to do with the kind of imperatives created by the capitalist market. So ideally, for this and for many other reasons, I would like to see these mechanisms changing at some point. This is something that I do not expect overnight. So of course, I think it's also important to think of specific mechanisms that can favor all of these problematic sectors to degrow, and if possible, measures that can be applied even in the absence of other deeper change taking. I mean, considering that now there is potentially so much awareness of the need of these changes, even though this potential has not been realized. No? When I'm talking of the growing of all of these sectors, I will not include necessarily the growing of cities, because I am aware that cities also offer a higher potential to respond to pandemics and other potential benefits. So I think that the case of cities is quite complex and quite tricky. But for me, at least, it's clear that all of these sectors that are here represented need to degrow strongly, from my point of view. And how? Well, we could think of many possible mechanisms to create this wedge between the sectors that need to degrow, and on the other hand, to reinforce health systems, because for me it's super important to break this feedback that I mentioned, to really be able to have strong health systems that are that everybody can have access to them, either because they are government systems or because they are community health systems. But it's important to have the reinforcement of these systems. We have this without having the secondary effect of, at the same time, having all of these other sectors growing, but having these sectors degrowing. And well, for example, a possible mechanism among many, quite a straightforward one, could be by taxing activities that create this trouble. When we think of activities for which it could be desirable to have them, if possible, someday in the future, even phased out and not just decrease it, I would suggest to have the revenues from these taxes. I mean, to have, of course, a strong taxes, and to have the revenues of these taxes invested in alternatives, such as, for example, plant-based food in the case of the alimentary system. And when it comes to activities that need to degrow, but perhaps not necessarily to disappear completely, I mean, for me, this would be the case of flight. I would like to see a smaller flight activity, to have it restricted, to have also better distributed, but not necessarily to disappear completely. And in this case, we could point towards to seek a kind of balance where there are enough taxes on the one hand to degrow these sectors, to keep these sectors constrained, and to fund health systems and to fund to fund different mechanisms to stop the emergence of new diseases, of new pathogens in the first place, so that really you can have a reasonable security that these systems will be able to stop new pathogens before flights, before aviation disseminates them all over the world and it becomes too late to stop them. And to have this tax, to have this increased inequality, I would suggest that this tax takes into account the frequency with which people travels, so that all of us have that the chance to sporadically travel sometime. And well, if we look at numbers and numbers of airlines and numbers of public expenditure in health systems in different countries and numbers of estimations that has been done in the literature of the needs of investment to prevent the emergence of new infectious diseases, we see that really, we can see clearly that really a strong tax on commercial airlines could make a difference. So for me, this would be a kind of proposal to consider. I would encourage other different proposals too, but for me, it's super important to tackle this issue. And as I said, I find it incredible that there is not a broader social discussion about this. No, unfortunately, the social discussion is much more focused around the denialist discourse, on the opposition to certain regulations. And to people who think that in this way they are fighting the system, I will tell them two things. No? First, that this discourse in part has been funded by neoliberal think tanks, which are the same that has been to a large extent favoring the same system that has produced the pandemic in the first place. And second, that the discourse that presents a pandemic as a lie of the system, what this is doing is concealing the fact that the pandemic is in fact a crime of the system, as I am arguing. And I would like this message to be disseminated. Fortunately, there are also some seeds of resistance to what I think is the real problem, to the activities that are generating that risk of pandemics, that have generated COVID-19, that are generating the risk of new and worse pandemics in the future. Well, the picture, the upper picture, in fact, is these banners are based in things that I wrote, but these are just a small handful of people who are mobilizing. And my hope thanks to Anne for the opportunity to spread this idea through this talk, and thanks to all the opportunities, because I would like to see much more mobilization about this and the change happening, because the problem is so huge and is affecting all of us. No? So in theory, there is the potential for mobilization and for this kind of change happening. So, well, thank you. To end up, I put here this manuscript that I wrote during the lockdown, and where most of these ideas are given in much more detail, and you can find it here in this link, or remember the title and look for it, or look for my name and the word pandemic, and you will find it. So yes, this was what I wanted to say. And
thanks Salvador. It was a very, very inspiring talk, full of ideas. Now I will open the floor to any questions. Otherwise, I'll pose you some myself. But first of all, let me check if someone in the audience has any question. Okay,
question or comment. Perhaps someone does not agree, and disagreements are also welcome.
Okay, I will ask myself a couple of questions. Well, the first one would be, you said that for most of people it was a surprise, the outbreak of the COVID-19. But for those people already analyzing this type of topics, it was not such a surprise. So maybe this is obvious from what you have exposed, but could you be more explicit about your opinion on whether this type of outbreaks could be more often in the future? And then another question would be, well, a question, a comment. I mean, it is quite remarkable that when you enter the issue of what possible solutions do we have for this in the future, you especially mentioned two initiatives in the area of taxation. I don't know if you mentioned this because you know this is a topic of interest at end, or because you really think that I mean this is one of the two solutions that we could come up with. Actually, in the paper that you mentioned that we did on the Jevons paradox applied to energy, it was also taxation one of the main issues pointed out. My question would be into different directions. On the one hand, if apart from taxations, you would be able to mention some other issue in the area of environmental policy that would be helpful to prevent new outbreaks. And the other one would be, well, you developed quite a bit the idea of a tax on aviation, and I mean, for me, it was quite original to see some of the details of your proposal in terms, for example, of considering the number of frequent flyers or the travelers class and so on, which hadn't seen before. But then you also mentioned, or at least in an image, it seemed that you were suggesting a tax on farming, on meat production. Would you be able to provide more details on how this would be applied? And do you know of any examples of such taxes being already implemented? Thank you.
Okay, many thanks for the two questions. Interesting. About the first point, to which extent, well, about the first point, about the point that this was already known by people knowing about epidemiology, and to which and to which extent now it can be well established that we are in a phase of increasing risk. Rather than saying, well, rather than referring to myself, my opinions or so on, I would refer to IPBES, to IPBES, which I don't know how many people knows it, but well, I guess most of you know IPCC, which is the organism of reference for climate change, the reference for governments and for scientific institutions. Some years ago, there was the creation of another organism following exactly the same example as IPCC, which is this, IPBES, which is like IPCC, but focusing on biodiversity instead of climate change. And already during the pandemic, IPBES created a special report on pandemics. And there is quite a strong sentence, that we're entering the age of pandemics. So really the organism that is the one that represents the state of the art on biodiversity and ecosystem destruction and ecosystem services, that represents a scientific consensus, is saying that we're entering the age of pandemics. And this thinking just in terms of, especially in terms of ecosystem destruction. Also, since many years ago, I mentioned explicitly in the case of animal agriculture that one of the main concerns is the possibility of a deadly new strain of flu. Since many years ago, there is a lot of scientific attention paid to this, and different outbreaks that are taking place but fortunately do not reach very far. For example, the same year, there was an outbreak of a new strain of flu in some farms in Russia that was quite deadly but did not spread a lot. And this is happening, and really this is quite a special risk that is there. And then there is the issue that is so there is a lot of literature about this, about these aspects. And in the case of flights that I also mentioned, I mean, there is a lot of literature in terms of models that uses flights as a variable, but not so much discussion, or almost no discussion, about constraining flights because of this. But what is clear is that before the pandemic, as I said, international flights were doubling every 10 years. And it's quite obvious that continuing in this way, I mean, now it's not happening because of this feedback that I discussed, the pandemic. But if this continued, I mean, for me, it's quite obvious that yes, that health systems will be unable to control local outbreaks before they spread. So really, there's a strong basis for to be concerned about this and to act, no, rather than just being concerned. About taxes, well, yeah, as you know, you and us have many commonalities in our way of thinking. I mean, really, this was something that the best idea that I thought during I mean, even though I had written about this kind of dangers and effects a little bit, not a lot, but I had written a little bit before the pandemic. During the pandemic, I thought, well, this is the chance to try to spread solutions and to let people know about this problem. And the first idea that I thought of that could have some viability, that could be perhaps accepted, implemented, was this issue of taxes. Also because, well, in the case of flights, which is where I think the idea is new, is especially new. In the case of taxes, in the case of flights, also because not just to constrain flights, but also because there is such a high injustice, no? And I see also this option as a way to somewhat compensate to some extent, no? You can, I don't believe in compensation in monetary terms, but to some extent, you can say in a fuzzy way that you are compensating, no? That there's some activity creating the cost, so it should also take care of the ways to stop this problem, no? So for me, it's quite fair that airlines, instead of just reaping benefits, they also fund airlines. I mean, they also fund health systems. In the case of farming, this was something that long ago had already been proposed in some sporadic papers, but really no attention had been paid to it. You said more about the details. Well, in the specific suggestion that I detailed in this manuscript that I wrote during the lockdown, I suggested a difference in the use of funds in these two sectors that I highlighted, because I thought that, well, when you use funds from flights, for example, to fund something else that is needed, such as health systems, you're also creating a dependency, no? So there is the danger that at some point governments have a vested interest in not completely eliminating that sector. But well, in the case of flights, as I said, I don't think it's really necessary to fully eliminate the sector, just to constrain and better distribute it. And also, well, it's something that can be implemented at a global scale more easily. While, so you can have a global tax and distribute these revenues according to the needs of different countries. In theory, well, it is super difficult, but I see it as something a little easier than in the case of animal farming. In the case of animal farming, of course, there are many differences in different countries. So perhaps we could agree on global targets ideally, but allowing perhaps each country to use its own methods. I suggested taxes, but not so much as a way to fund health systems to avoid creating this vested interests, because I see no limit on how much we could decrease the sector. No, I mean, especially in the case of industrial farming, I think we have lots of reasons to just try to phase it out, but really this is not possible without a huge decrease in the amount of animal-based food that is being eaten in wealthy countries. So I really would not think of a limit here, no? Even when, and I mean, considering that the amount that you have in other ways of raising animals is quite limited, and this is why I made this difference. So I thinking of funds to favor plant-based food, also in a way that people does not have an increase of costs in their food, which is a basic need, no? And well, this, and of course there could be also funds to help in the conversion of animal agriculture, in making it easier to cope with diseases, to stop the spread of diseases, or just to convert to other sectors. No, so this is my proposal, but of course there can be a lot of discussion here. Yeah. And you asked about other measures apart from taxes, no? Just briefly, yeah, sure. I think there can be, well, in ecological economics, no, there talks about other measures such as putting constraints, no? There can be just, for example, laws that put constraints. Well, of course, and now and another important point, I'm talking about taxes, but many other sectors, in fact, are receiving a lot of public funding, no, of government funding. So, of course, the first point is to eliminate this funding before taxing them, or at the same time as we tax them. No? So I think this is a basic measure, and in the case of animal agriculture, including industrial farms, they are receiving funding from the European community. In the case of flights, they are subject to a lot of exemptions of taxes such as VAT. No? I mean, flights in some countries, in some European countries, pay no VAT. In other countries, pay just reduced VAT. Just in a few countries are paying something else, considering the environmental impact, but so little, no? So yes, I think that there are these measures, and of course there could be direct measures to forbid, or more there could be more command and control measures, no, to stop these sectors, to put restrictions, to put constraints over these sectors. And there could be funding to develop alternatives to all of these sectors, no? So yeah, I think there could be many possible measures, and well, you know more than me about measures that can be applied in general, no, for environmental impacts, and in this case for epidemiological impacts, which is quite similar at the end, no, the situation.
Thanks, Salvador. Rosaria, it's your turn.
Yes. Well, thank you for the presentation. Actually, when you were starting to talk about aviation taxation, I thought about it's not the same, but I could see a parallelism with the concept of extended producer responsibility of any product. So as the producer are responsible for the entire cycle of a specific product that is inserted in the market, and they have to care also about the final disposal of this product. We can see like parallelism with the flight. The risk I see here, as the risk I see also in the extended producer responsibility, is the fact that as the producers maybe will increase the price of the product, so their benefit will not decrease because they just increase the price of product. This can be also applied to the flight. So while we are inserting any taxation, we need to also to think about a kind of limitation of the price of the product, or of the flight in this case. Otherwise, again, let's say the consequences are going directly to the people. That is something that in part is okay, but I think that since the flight company are the ones that are selling the flight, there will be the ones that will charge more for their flight, and the population will pay that. So I don't know, how do you see that?
Yeah, thanks. I really share this concern, no? And well, this is the reason, well, why I thought in the case of flights that the tax could take into account the frequency with which people flies and the class, no? To try to at least mitigate a little bit, because, well, for example, I'm aware that there are people who really live far from their families, that are migrants, and I want these people to be able to travel sometime, no? So I thought, this is a possible way to mitigate this problem to some extent, no? At least to make it the affordability more equally distributed, so that wealthy people who travel alone now have more difficulty to have more to pay than other people, and perhaps then travel less and leave more room for other people to travel. And in the case of food systems, it's also one of the reasons why I thought that, since this is something that is really a basic need, to have the revenues invested in making, well, in other kinds of food, no, especially in plant-based diet, to make it more affordable and better, well, more disseminated and better known. But well, I don't pretend to be sure that this will suffice, no. And well, in general, I'm in favor, on the one hand, of having this kind of taxes or anywhere that can drive the economy in certain paths, and of having also strong distributive taxes and limitations. But I am open if you Rosario, or any other one can think, Rosario, sorry, or any other one, or can think of other solutions, that will be great. No, I mean, just, in fact, I'm opening a discussion here that I think is absent, and any solutions are welcome. No, these are just the best that I could think of.
Thanks, Salvador. Now, Laura Calvet has raised her hand. Please, Laura.
Yes, thanks, Salvador, for your presentation. It was very inspiring, and I am agreeing with all that have you said. Yeah, I have like one doubt. One is that you could expand on the thing that you said about when you were talking about the persons that were denying the pandemic. It's like a struggle to fight the system. I get not clear, what did you mean about the lie of the system and crime of the system? If you can expand a little bit more on that. And the second one was related to what Rosario was saying, and you, about the taxes, the subsidies. I am pretty agree on that, but we have seen that in several years of taxing, that's not very good taxation, I know, but of like economic environmentalists, not ecological environment, sorry, ecological economics, more in environmentalist economics, then they put a lot, no, these policies with the taxation, and this is not working pretty well. And now I don't know if you have read or you have taken a look on the book on Giorgos Kallis on the limits, that he's more posing the thing that for have a true growth and not to face to the limits imposed by the biophysical limits that they exist, but limits are always a subjective point. It depends on the objective that you want to get. No, that means, for example, that IPCC arranged with the other governments 2 degrees of growth of temperature, no, worldwide temperature. It's because we have an objective. We don't want to, for example, have the melting of the polar caskets, but maybe it's happening, or what we can say, okay, it's okay for us, have that, and then we have to, technological things are going to improve our life in another way, this technocratic question. Then maybe with taxations and all that we have said, that I completely agree, and then also to give up all the subsidies on the industrial farming and that. I don't know if we need more a culture of limits, no? But that's very difficult, because we are living in it is imperative of growth, and all of us need for more growth, maybe like publishing more also, no, or having more and more. And then I don't know if you have a think on that, and you think on more philosophical ways for the growth. And so I hope I make sense what I said.
Yeah, many thanks, Laura. For me, it makes a lot of sense. About the first point about denialism and so on, well, this is something that, that I have faced since during the lockdown. I started to try to disseminate these ideas. I found that there was a trouble for these ideas to disseminate. But on the other hand, I was finding lots of messages of people saying that the virus does not exist, that all of this is a kind of conspirations of governments or central banks or Bill Gates or anyone to try to have us under control, to and then also that basic remedies such as masks, that in fact that have always been used for very long, that in fact they do not exist, and also a part of the conspiration. And I saw that all of this noise was really a problem. That I mean, I wanted an opposition. I expected. I made my best to try, within my very limited means, to try to trigger an informed opposition driving to a real problem. And I found that what was really having success was all of these ideas that had no foundation. And what I mean is that if you are saying that the virus does not exist, or that there is not such a pandemic, it's not so serious, and so on, you are hiding the fact that we have a big problem that has been created by this economic system oriented to growth, this capitalist economic system oriented to growth. And this is what I wanted to say. And if you say that there is no problem, then it's more difficult to spread this idea, I think. And I refer to this. And one thing I wondered, this is why I put this slide, one thing I wonder is whether, which was the position that neoliberal think tanks were taking in this, where they had a role, and this is why I looked for more information, going directly to the websites of neoliberal think tanks, and I really found message in this way, and not just messages. For example, in the case of Herland Institute, which is the one that was the most explicit about this, even had gone to it even had presented cases to even had started trials against the governments of some states in the US against the restrictions. So they are really putting a lot of money there, and for me, it's kind of coherent. I don't think it's so much to hide the fact that they have created this problem, which is a consequence, because if they deny the problem, they have no more responsibility on the problem, because it does not exist. But I don't think it's so much because of this, because unfortunately, there is not even, I think in itself, this idea is not disseminating, even without the help of these think tanks, but well, more because since they are so radical in favor of a free capitalist market, they want no restrictions, And also in this case of Herland Institute, it traditionally has been funded by oil companies that are a kind of company that has been especially impacted by lockdowns, And well, so I refer to this, and I would like to change the conflict elsewhere to a real problem. And about the other point, well, about this, I would also like to say that besides think tanks, it's also clear that the main neoliberal government right now, the one with the strongest neoliberal discourse, which is among the major ones, is probably Brazil. Clearly has been doing terrible things in relation to the pandemic, Bolsonaro, and has even been persecuting scientists because of what they said about the pandemics, like Lucas Ferrante is quite an impressive case. And well, Trump at the beginning, Trump did also the same, or something, well, perhaps not so much, but something equivalent, but something along the same lines. So well, and about the second point, the growth, and whether limits are something objective or something that depends on our values. I do not discard that really there are some objective limits exist, but in general, I agree with Yorgos, and I agree with what you said, And in fact, when I am proposing this about the limit to flights, for example, or to animal agriculture and especially industrial farming, of course, what I am saying is that I prefer to have all of this limited than than to have pandemics and to have all the other environmental impacts and all of the other kind of impacts that these sectors have, of course, no, which is not just pandemics. And yes, I would like this to be I mean, my LBI would be for this to be an opportunity for the change of mindset, no? And in general, to think in terms of the growth. And this is why I also put that image where someone is throwing the euro away, no? Because for me, I would like this to be an opportunity to change mentality, to reach awareness, as you say, of this, well, that it makes no sense to grow forever, that it creates many more problems for us than benefits and to the growth, no? And well, this idea of the taxes were just a possible way to start to attack explicitly these problems in a moment where I thought that there would be potentially enough social support for these specific measures addressing these problems. But if you see here, I think this would have been already quite a big change of mentality, no? Stop growing flights, stop growing meat consumption, being even more serious too about global warming. I mean, for me, both things all together, and just specific proposals and transmitting the whole mentality, no? And now, at this point, perhaps where I see that after this momentum created by the lockdown, where I thought that the proposals had some potential of success even within the current system, now perhaps I'm even more interested in the part that you say, no, in explaining this as even another problem of the growth-oriented economy that has very rarely been discussed, no? And so yes, basically I agree with you, Laura.
Oh, thanks, very clear, Salvador. Sorry, it was a mistake.
Thanks, Salvador. I think we will finalize the session here. Thanks a lot for your very inspiring thoughts. I just want to have a final word to announce the next webinar that we will have. We'll have the pleasure to count with Isabel Angelovsky. The session will be the next 12th of January, again at 12 o'clock online. And Isabel Angelovsky is an ICREA research professor. She's the director of the Barcelona Lab for Urban Environmental Justice and Sustainability at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And the topic of her talk will be the Green City and Social Injustice, 21 Tales from North America and Europe. I hope you will also join us for that upcoming webinar, and hope to see you there. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Salvador. Bye-bye.